Good evening, everybody, and welcome back to another edition of my Yeshiva Year's Fireside Chat. And tonight's, interviewee needs no introduction. This is one I'm very excited about. I'm sure many of us are. So I guess without further ado, Rabbi Zobin, to jump straight in, perhaps you could, for those, who don't know as well, many of us who do know may not know the full details, to tell us about, after Hasmonia and what yeshivas you attended, Kolelim, so we can just orientate the world that you inhabited in those years.
Okay, thank you very much for inviting me to this fireside chat. So I was a Hasbro boy, after which I went to learn under Rabbi Kushalevsky. I was in Be'er Yaakov, in Mir, and for a short time, and under Rabbi Yitzchak Soloveitchik. Those were my primary rabbis.
And that was in Heichal HaTorah and the Tzvi's as it is today.
Rabbi Kushalevsky, Rabbi Tzvi's, in those days it was called Pressburg. He used to rent accommodation from the Pressburg Yeshiva building in Givat Shaul. I had the yeshiva was opposite to Rav Olber, who lived literally 28 meters away from the front door of the yeshiva. And that's where it was in those days.
And what was the yeshiva like then compared to now? I know we've got a few Tzvi's guys online, and people are familiar with the Tzvi's. Was it also very English dominated, or?
No, so in those days it was primarily an Israeli yeshiva. There was only 2 or 3 English guys there, and quite a lot of Americans. At the time, you used to get quite a lot of Yeshiva University and Karen B'Yavneh graduates. I left Hasbro and came to Eretz Yisrael. I never really heard the word Haredi or Modern Orthodox. It wasn't really used in those days. The whole Yeshiva University world was a new world to me. I didn't know the names of the Rosh Yeshiva there. I hadn't really heard of Rav Soloveitchik. I became quite friendly with a lot of the Karen B'Yavneh boys. I considered myself a little bit of an honorary alumni at the time, because so many of them used to go on to Reb Tzvi's. At the time, Rav Goldvicht had just stopped being Rosh Yeshiva in Karen B'Yavneh. He was the Rosh Yeshiva, and in my second year there, he stopped being the Rosh Yeshiva, and he retired to Yerushalayim, and he used to give a vard to his Talmidim from Karen B'Yavneh, and I managed to weasel my way into that vard somehow or other, and I had the great pleasure and zchus of having a connection with him. He was a Bal Machshava. He used to speak in Drush and in Machshava, and he had a strong yard in Kabbalah. And that's what he used to speak about. He was a very regal man. He was really a prince amongst men, a very princely figure. And I had the remarkable experience of being shown the letter that he got from the Chazon Ish. His wife once showed it, in which the Chazon Ish encouraged him to open what was the aim, the mother of all the Hesder yeshivas at the time. It was an interesting episode. He was, I don't know exactly the story of his life, but I believe he became a Ben Bias at both the Briskerov's home and the Chazon Ish's home, and had a lot of contact with them. From what I understood from him and his wife, the Briskerov was very upset when he opened a Hesder yeshiva, but the Chazon Ish was supportive of it, and that was a little bit of a splitting of ways at the time, which I think was personally quite painful for him, the way he used to speak about it. But he went on, of course, and founded Karen B'Yavneh. Rabbi Tzvi himself at the time was very involved in the yeshiva. His wife was the mother of the yeshiva, and he used to eat over all the Shabbos meals there. I used to accompany Rabbi Tzvi back to his house. He lived in Hanof. The yeshiva was in Givat Shaul, and I used to join them for lunch. That was my slot with them. I had time with them. Rabbi Tzimtzaki Kushalevsky, Rabbi Tzvi's wife, used to make nice stuffed cabbage. That was her standard lunch. She was a sister of Rav Gurovitz.
Right.
She once told me that her husband knows how to learn better than Rav than her brother. That's what she told me. They have a very different Tarach Limud, but he knows how to learn better than her brother. That's what she told me once.
Wow. And I guess for many, year 13 in Hasbro or whatever school, that decision of what yeshiva, I guess some people think it's going to change the trajectory of their life, or whether it does. What made you go to choose Reb Tzvi's? Was that a popular choice? Where were most of, your friends or people?
No, it wasn't a popular choice at the time. I went because it was primarily it was a very share-based yeshiva. The focus of the day was very much on his share, and everyone used to work on his share. Later on in my life, I've changed my derech halimud away from Reb C, and in that sense, I have somewhat mixed feelings about the derech halimud that I picked up there in particular. It's not the way I've chosen to follow in the long run, but Reb C very much used to push understanding things, what he used to call ad hasof. You have to really grasp it and understand it and feel it and experience it in every fibre of your being. And he was a bulldozer of a man. He pushed himself to the limit intellectually and in his effort. He used to stay up night after night learning, and I had the privilege of witnessing this. And every svara he had to understand and feel from every angle and every facet of what the svara was about. He was a very tough Rebbe at the time and very critical of those who he felt weren't thinking properly, weren't thinking clearly. I remember once coming in and he was looking at some notes that someone had written up on the sugya, and he was saying, this is rubbish, this is nonsense, and he was really berating whoever had written the notes. And I asked him, whose notes are these? Because I was curious about this. And it turns out these were his notes from last time round. And he was absolutely furious with himself for, in his understanding, having missed the point. I remember once coming into him and he was crying, and I asked him why he was crying. In fact, twice I saw him cry. The first time was on Motzi Yom Kippur. He used to daven for the Omid, particularly in the Elo he used to daven, and he felt that he hadn't davened properly that Yom Kippur, and he was, this was a Motzi Yom Kippur, he was crying. He hasn't managed to lift the yeshiva in the way he wanted to. The other time I saw him crying was because he felt he hadn't learned the sugya. He had looked at his notes from last time round, and he felt he had understood the sugya last time better than he understood it this time, and that upset him deeply that that he had understood the sugya better the first time than the second time. So he had an incredible intensity of drive and burning desire to really understand things and get to the bottom of them.
Maybe we'll come back to discussing, I guess, Rabbi and the personality types. But moving on to Be'er Yaakov, I guess not everyone's familiar with what yeshiva is, what type of yeshiva is. The Torah personalities there, so maybe you could speak a little bit about that.
So Be'er Yaakov was in those days a small village situated near Ramla Lod, that part of the country. The yeshiva was outside the small village. The village itself was very small, and the yeshiva was outside the village, surrounded by orange groves and vineyards and fields, with a sort of a campus, a sort of countryside campus. The two founding fathers of the yeshiva were Rav Wolbe and Rav Moshe Shmuel. By the time I went to the yeshiva, Rav Wolbe had already left. As I said, he was living in Givat Shaul, and the Rosh Yeshiva was Rav Moshe Shmuel Shapiro. Rav Moshe Shmuel Shapiro is hard for me to talk about without tearing up. He was, in my mind, a malach of Hashem. He was an angelic figure. He was someone who, to me, was a model of chesed and warmth and sidkus. And when he spoke to me, felt waves of love. You saw someone who was incredibly refined, with an exceptional refinement and nobility. His Torah was very elevated. Just talking about derech halimud, it's a longer conversation. His Torah was very, very abstract, and he was an elevated person. He walked really, in my mind, with his he really walked amongst the angels in my view. I saw with him. He was himself he was from the Shapiro family, the Volozhin Shapiros. His grandfather was Rabbi Shapiro, the son-in-law of the Netziv, who was the Rosh Yeshiva of Volozhin. His uncle was Reb Chaim Brisker. His first cousin was the Brisker Rav. Reb Chaim Brisker was his son at his bris milah, and he really shared with me and to me brought me into the pre-war world of the Olam Yeshivas in Europe. He learned under Rabbi Ber, he learned under Rabbi Chanan Wasserman. I felt that Baranovich was somewhere I knew. I remember the first time I went to Poland on a Holocaust trip, and we saw Baranovich, how exciting it was to see Baranovich. He told us the stories of the world's yeshivas. He told me about Zobins that he met before the war. We know no contact with any of the Zobins. They all got lost in the Second World War. He described the personalities of Rabbi Chanan Wasserman, who was his Rosh Yeshiva and Yeshiva Katana, of Rabbi Ber. He was very musical, and he used to, as a boy, as a young man, when he was learning in Baranovich, he used to sneak out to the Kalina Tish, and he picked up quite a few Hasidic Negodim. He composed several hundred tunes of his own. In fact, one of them, I had the great privilege, it's a whole story, but basically he used to esteg. In those days, the yeshivas didn't provide food, but they used to put people out to different families to eat. And he used to eat on Shabbos lunch with someone called Rabbi Yonah Karpov, who was Rabbi Yonah Minsky, he was known. He wrote a sefer called Yonas Elam. He died, was murdered in the war in 1942. He was a Gaon Adeh and a friend of Moshe Shmuel, and he composed a stunningly beautiful nigun, outstanding nigun. And just recently, for various reasons, I became aware that this tune was not recorded. It just simply is not recorded anywhere. It's not online. No one has ever recorded it. And I have a very musical nephew, who I'm not a very musical person, but I sang the song to him and he put music to it and got a chazan to sing it. And we put it up online now. He used to, every Shabbos, Shalosh Shuttas, he used to sing. He used to invite Bochum around to his house. He lived on this campus. And I saw with him really Maisa Nissim and Maisa Godless on a day-to-day basis. I can tell stories if you're interested, but I just saw stories of exceptional greatness. And those who know me know I'm not that mystically inclined, but I really saw Nissim also with him. He was someone who was famed for his ability to daven, his koyach tefillah, and he was a remarkable person, and a Tom Chacham of the highest stature. He was a great man.
Thank you for painting that portrait. I think for many, especially living in Chutz La'aretz, perhaps one of the Gedolim who's less known and whose influence has been less felt. What was the student body of the yeshiva like, and how did you get there from, I guess, a Rasvi Kishlesi milieu in Yerushalayim to Be'er Yaakov?
So the story was, after I finished from Tzvi, I was only in Tzvi for a couple of years, and then I was looking for something else, and everyone knew about Mir, so I went to Mir. Mir was too big for me. I didn't enjoy it. I didn't want to stay there. I will maybe later, if I get a chance, speak about my connection to Rabbi Shmulevitz, which was a very special privilege. But be that as it may, I left Mir, and due to a combination of events, heard about Be'er Yaakov and went to learn there. I actually turned up there for Shabbos to explore it, and I sat with a young man there who was learning there, became a close friend, and I began learning with him. And after a period of about an hour, I realized that I didn't know how to learn. And I remember he was sort of showing me a Torah that I didn't really know exist, which was the Torah Brisk, which Baruch Hashem I grew to learn existed, but I didn't really know that Torah. And it was like a mind-blowing experience. And I still remember the shtickle Torah that we learned together. And I began trying to listen to Moshe Shmuel's Torah, and I realized it was like a completely new light in Torah that I hadn't really had, and I found it very uplifting and very elevating. It's a very, his version of Brisk. Brisk, as is well known, breaks up into many versions and many forms. Brisk means lots of different things to different people, but his version of Brisk was exceptionally elevated and abstract, and it spoke to me.
And is it yeshiva of Israeli Bachrim mainly?
It's Israeli yeshiva. It's a small yeshiva. It never had many Bachrim. It was always around about the 100 mark, if that. And as I said, he ran the yeshiva. He lived there with his wife and many members of his family. Just being able to watch him interact, the stories I could tell are endless. But just the casual, he lived Torah. I mean, I'll just tell a few stories about him with your permission. I just remember once eating at his house Friday night, and his wife's cooking. I think she burnt something, and one of the food dishes she served was burnt, and she was very upset about it. So he said to her, Rebbitzin, Ziboris de doch ke'idus de alma. So this is a phrase from the Gemara in Baba Kama, which talks about different qualities, and the Gemara talks about the lowest quality of one person being the best quality of someone else's. He said, Ziboris de doch, your lowest quality is ke'idus de alma, is like the best quality of the rest of the world. She was a learned lady. She was a London. He used to speak to her in learning. In fact, he quotes her in his Sforim here and there. And quotes her as B'nai Besu, members of my house, said this. She was also a remarkable lady. They had a daughter who, I'm not going to go into details, but they had a daughter who was of fragile mental health, and watching his interaction with his daughter was a remarkable experience. For those of you who don't know, one of the many achievements that Moshe Shmuel had was that he translated the Ri Migash. The Ri Migash was the Rebbe of the Rambam. The Rambam writes about the Ri Migash that his knowledge and umkus, the depth of his thought, was mafli, was wondersome. The Rimigash was the reservoir of the Rambam, and he writes with awe about the depth of thought of the Rimigash. So having a haskama like that from the Rambam is not a bad token of approval. And the Rimigash's Torah was barely learned because he wrote a lot in Arabic, and it wasn't translated, and we really only had fragments collected by the Shittim Kubetzes and others. And Ramosha Shmuel arranged for it to be translated into Lashon HaKodesh and to be edited and formatted and so on. And the Rimigash that we now have on Masechus Nedarim, on Masechus Shavuos, on Masechus Baba Basra is from Ramosha Shmuel. And the remarkable thing is that it's a whole story, but friends of mine had the privilege of, together with me, of going through Ramosha Shmuel's archives, some of his papers. And we discovered that when he was a Bacha in Europe, he wrote the following. He said, I see that the Rimigash has a particular light of Torah to reveal, and I commit myself to spreading his Torah in Klal Yisrael, and that's what he did. He really spread the Torah of the Rimigash in Klal Yisrael. So you just see how, as a young age, he already, like a lot of great people, he had a certain life vision. I also saw there in these notes that he committed that every piece of Torah he would say would always be halacha l'maisa. And now he has a very longish set of sforim on Shas called Kunshas Abiyorim, and Shari Shmuas. He has two sets of sforim on Shas. And at the beginning it says these are shiurei halacha. And I always wondered about that turn of phrase, shiurei halacha, she'lomadnu, that we learned, or she'nemu b'yeshivas b'Yaakov, that was said. And it seems that he felt everything he was saying was halacha l'maisa. He only ever said Torah that he felt was true he was a Rosh Yeshiva. It wasn't a playsake in his career, but he felt everything he was saying was halacha l'maisa. So he was, I can't remember why I began telling these stories, but he was a phenomenal individual. Really, Kamalach Hashem. The Gemara says that one's Rebbe should be in one's eyes as Kamalach Hashem Tzavakus, and in my eyes, that's what he was.
Would you say for you that he was your Rebbe Muvhag?
My Rebbe Muvhag was Rabbi Yitzchak Soloveitchik, not Ramosha Shmuel. And the reason is because I was never zocher to understand enough of what Ramosha Shmuel said. There's really only two pieces of Torah that he said that I felt I understood fully in all my time there. Everything else I only partially got from him. I didn't fully understand, unfortunately. Unfortunately, I didn't fully understand everything he had to say. But I understood a couple of things that he said in my life.
So was that then, I guess, a progression from Ber Yaakov, I guess, introduction to Brisk, proper Brisk in Yerushalayim? And
the main thing I got from Ramosha Shmuel in Torah was that I realized I understood nothing. That was what I got from him.
And could you speak a little bit about learning and being in Brisk and the atmosphere, the outlook? I guess it's known for its charifas, both in Lomdus and in Hashkafa. And how did you connect with that? And I guess from who Rabbi Zobin is today and comparing to Brisk Yerushalayim. So
Rabbi Yitzchak Soloveitchik is a branch of Brisk. He's not the main Brisker dynasty. He unlike many Briskers, he's an Eloi. There's a lot of Brisker Torah is about systematic thought and methodology. Rabbi Yitzchak was an Eloi. He is an Eloi. I mean, he's all over. He's a genius with an incredibly fertile mind. And in that sense, he's not a classic Brisker. He's not. In that aspect, the sort of very methodological, slow and measured pace of Brisk is not him. But his knowledge of Torah is phenomenal, and the depth of his Torah is remarkable. And for me, he was the one that really gave me the Torah of Brisk. When I first joined the yeshiva, he used to give a 3 to 4 hour share every single day, and I felt I had the privilege of learning on him for 10 years. And I felt that it was, that there's these old-fashioned mangles where you put a cloth through rollers and it gets squeezed and you wring out all the liquid from it. And that's what I felt he used to do to my mind every single day. It was exceptionally hard work. I used to spend 15, 18 hours a day on his chair. There was a lot to learn from it. Rabbi Yitzchak, again, a phenomenal individual. He was a very different sort of person to Ramosha Shmuel. He was younger when I got to know him. I only knew Ramosha Shmuel when he was older. He was younger, with an energy, with a sharpness, with a brisker sharpness. He didn't tolerate fools gladly, and I was a fool. you know, he knocked us into shape in a brisk way, and one learned the precision of formulation and the clarity of thought, and everything had to be meduyak, and you had to understand the Haggadah properly, and so much else that is brisk. I mean, it's unfathomable. There's so much to talk about. Also, unusually for a brisker, he has a very strong yad in Kabbalah and in Machshava, and that was also something that was spoken about. The Litvish Olam doesn't really speak much about that area of Torah. In fact, I was there once when, I'll tell you a couple of stories of conversations I had with, many conversations I have to tell, but with Ramosha Shmuel. Someone once asked Ramosha Shmuel, I'll tell you two stories about the Brisker Rav. The first question someone asked him was, did the Brisker Rav know Noshim Zikin as well as he knew Kodshim? It's well known that the Briskers focused on Kodshim. So he said he doesn't know, but he does know that there wasn't a single Mari Abulafia that the Brisker Rav didn't know Baal Peh and Baba Metzia. Now, if you know Baba Metzia, the Shittim Kvetz says these very, very long 3-column length pieces of Torah from Maria Abulafia, and that the Brisker Rav knew everyone Baal Peh. The reason I mention the story is someone once asked him why the Litvaks don't learn Kabbalah. So he said, what do you mean, the Litvaks don't learn Kabbalah? So he said, well, Rabbi Kivega, the Brisker Rav, they didn't learn Kabbalah. So he said, look, Rabbi Kivega, I don't know, but the Brisker, this is Ramosha Shmuel speaking, so the Brisker Rav, I myself saw his Kesavim in Kabbalah. So there is a whole Masorah from the Vilna Gaon of Kabbalah and Brisk, which isn't really much spoken about. For whatever reason, Rabbi Yitzchak used to speak much more about that than is standard amongst the Briskers. He was a known expert in the Kabbalah of the Vilna Gaon, and every so often his office door used to be shut, and inside was one of the many Mekabolim of Yerushalayim. About 5 minutes away from Rabbi Yitzchak is the Yeshiva Shari Shemaim, which is one of the Litvish and Hasidic Kabbalah yeshivas, and they used to pop in and out. I had a little connection with that yeshiva, not because of Kabbalah, but because there's a very choshev posek he learned there called Rabbi Abish Eisen, and I did shimush under him in various areas of halacha. So I used to do the shimush there in the yeshiva. That was the closest, unfortunately, I ever came to learning that chedek of Torah, but I used to go there to yeshiva just to do shimush and halacha with him. So that was also part of the buzz around the yeshiva, was this very unusual combination.
Wow. And just on top of that halacha point, you were in a halacha kollel after Brisker was within learning. Brisker Lomdas came with learning halacha as well.
Yeah, so no, I never learned in halacha kollel. I only ever learned under Rabbi Yitzchak Soloveitchik. He knew halacha. He was a bal halacha. But I took time out over the last few years in my time there to learn halacha. And I used to go afternoon seder to learn halacha, and then we learned there. By the way, one of the things I should mention that made it not typical in Brisk was we used to learn Noshim Zikin and Kodshim, and so I learned there Erevin under Rabbi Yitzchak and Chulin and Nidar and Shabbos and various other halachim sectors besides Zvachim and Menachos and the normal Brisker syllabus. So I used that as a chance to start learning halacha, but I never learned in a halacha kollel. And as I say, Rabbi Eisen, one particular area of halacha was something I learned a little bit of halacha from. But it didn't have the typical Brisker syllabus of just being Kodshim.
Right. Within, I guess, the Techunas of Torah, many of us, obviously, a Thursday night enjoy the Machshava Shiurim. So I suspect that it wasn't within Brisk that Rabbi Zobin got to know Aristotle and Kant and Soloveitchik and whoever else we benefit from hearing of. Where did that piece come in? The focus on Machshava, on philosophy, on the breadth of the Torah world and beyond.
So first of all, I'll tell you, I mean, you are correct, it wasn't in Brisk that I learned this. Having said that, Rabbi Yitzchak knew Moen Avachim, knows Moen Avachim. There's many stories to be told, but how much time do we have? Till what time?
Till people leave, I guess. It's really however long you have.
Okay, I'll just keep it short. Reb Chaim Brisker knew Moen Avachim and learned that part of the Rambam also. Reb Chaim Brisker was very friendly with someone called the Malach. The Malach was a Hasidic leader. I'm not going to go into the whole history of it, but Chabad, what we now associate the word Chabad with Lubavitch. The Chabad movement was founded by Reb Shneur Zalman of Liadi, and he had many followers, and Chabad splintered into many Hasidus, one of which is Lubavitch. So Lubavitch is simply one example of the Chabad Hasidus, but there were many. Chabad refers to Chacham and Das, that particular philosophy. There was a Hasidic rabbi called the Malach, who belonged to another branch of Chabad, and used to learn Nista and Machshava with Reb Chaim Brisker, Reb Chaim Soloveitchik. They used to walk up and down. Reb Chaim ended his life in Warsaw. He ran away during the war in Warsaw. And there's still eyewitnesses who report seeing the two of them walking along. The Malach was very dignified. He was a Hasidic Rabbi, he used to walk along standing very tall, and Reb Chaim Brisker was a little short, bent over Litvak. And people still describe Reb Chaim gesticulating wildly and waving his hands and walking fast to keep up with the Malach. He used to stride along. And Reb Chaim Brisker knew Moed Avachim, certainly. So these are things that are spoken about a little bit in Brisk, but you are correct, they're not discussed extensively. There's an interesting story how I got into more philosophical learning. I was always interested in it from school and up, but I never really dedicated serious time to it. In my time in Mir, I got an eye infection. And I may have told this story before, forgive me if I'm repeating myself. I got an eye infection, and to cut a long story short, I was unable to learn 3 Sidorim a day. So I wanted to fill my time in the third Seder, and not far from me is Sameach, where Rabbi Dr. David Gottlieb used to give shiurim to Bali Yeshiva, and I decided to go along, and I used to sit at the back of the class and listen to his classes, and he taught philosophy, and he's a philosopher, he's a trained philosopher, and I had the privilege of growing close to him, and that drew my interest into that. That was my first taste. He began recommending to me various academic works that I could read in philosophy, and I began reading that. I then got into the Moed Avachim, and through that discovered more about classic philosophy, the world of Aristotle and Plato. And for me, the Moed Avachim really was a lifesaver. I needed it desperately for my Yiddishkeit. I don't think I could be from without it. It's absolutely like a source of spiritual sustenance for me, and all because of that eye infection. So I'm very grateful to that.
Wow. You mentioned about Rebbeim,
Shmulevitz.
Yeah, Shmulevitz. So, and I guess he's described very different rabbinic personalities, from sort of the overbearing, strong figure of Rav Tzvi to the more regal, angelic figure. So, can you maybe speak about some of the Rebbeim? I guess part of the purpose of these talks is to get a sense of building those kasharim, what to look for in Rebbeim, how to connect to Rebbeim, and sort of the impact Rebbeim should be having, how much of it is Novea and our own religious and lives and our learning is directly influenced by Rebbeim, and how much we sort of go it alone and strike up our own derech.
Right. I think this chance in one's life to have a shaykhus to as many Rebbeim as one can and to learn from them. There's a whole Masorah of Torah which is very hard to pick up from books and from Sforim. A lot of Torah still remains Torah Sheba'al Peh, and one should therefore have a shaykhus to Rebbeim. I feel very privileged. I haven't mentioned here incredible privilege of going to one of Ramosha Shapiro, not Ramosha Shapiro, in Be'Yakov I was talking about Ramosha Shmuel Shapiro, Ramosha Shapiro, the Baal Machshava, and the privilege of going to one of his private shiurim for many, many years. He was exceptionally impactful in my life. I've since moved away in my way of thinking from that mahalach, but he opened my eyes to a whole chelek of Torah that he used to teach. I mentioned Rabbi Shmulevitz, who through again the ability to be close to him really connected me with the whole world of Musa and the Masorah of Reb Chaim Shmulevitz and that way of thinking. These are people that one gains from. When I was in Mir, Mir davens very slowly and I daven very fast. By instinct, I'm not such a patient person, and so I looked around for a faster minyan, and I discovered that in Meir Shorim there was a little shtibel that used to get about 14 people. That davens quite fast, and I used to go and daven there, in particular on Yom Neron. That's where I used to go and daven. And the Rav of this little shtibel was Rav Yashiv, and in those days he wasn't mobbed. He was the Rav of the shtibel, and I kid you not, there were literally 14 people there, if that, on Yom Neron during the week, every Shabbos, and he was the Rav of this shtibel. And again, having the privilege to daven with him, everyone knew he was the Gadol Hador at the time, but in those days no one mobbed Gedolim for whatever reason. And he used to invite us around to his house for Havdalah afterwards. The bathroom, we'd go around to him for Havdalah and we could talk to him. The whole different environment. He was very. He wasn't a warm man. He was a very stern person. I remember once on Motzi Yom Kippur, someone came into the shtibel to ask him for bracha, and he didn't want to give him a bracha. He wasn't into brachas. This person was nagging, and eventually Rabbi Yasha said, I'll give you a bracha if you leave me alone. And he said, fine. And he said, oh, good year. Have a good year. And that was the extent of the bracha he got. But seeing these people, I live with that image in front of me, and these were a different order of magnitude, and I hope I convey when I teach Torah that all these mahalchim represent great people, and this isn't about. I think we need to have confidence in our hashkafa. We need to know our hashkafa, but equally we shouldn't slip into negating other hashkafas, and whether it's brisk or the Torah Samach Shava of Moshe Shapiro or Rabbi Yashiv and his mahalach or the Shmulevitzes. To me, it's important to realize these are great people. These aren't simple people, and just knowing that there's a vision and a grandeur of Torah out there is something that's important. I remember on one Erev Tisha B'Av, Rabbi Shmulevitz giving a shmooze, and he was explaining, he was quoting a medrash that when the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed, we lost the whole chelek of Torah. And he said that this is what we should be misabed about on Tisha B'Av, that we don't have the Torah in the way we used to have it. We don't have as much Torah as Rabbi Akiva had. And he began crying when he, as he said this, that he doesn't. And I just found that amazing to see a figure who cried over not having the Torah of Rabbi Akiva. That's something very, very special. And I always remember that. And just to know that I've seen someone who felt such pain over not knowing the Torah of Rabbi Akiva is something very remarkable. And just seeing the comfort these people had with Torah. Rabbi Rafal, there were three Shmulevitz's brothers in Meir. Rabbi Rafal Shmulevitz, Rabbi Meir Shmulevitz, who's a Gaon it was an Eloi, more of an Eloi. And I remember them tummeling and learning once. They were all talking and learning after Shir. They were Shmulevitzes. They were big characters, big extroverts, very outgoing, and they were all arguing and learning. And then a little old lady joined in the conversation, and at the time I didn't know who she was. Turns out she was their sister, the fourth sibling, the Rebbitzin of Reb Nochem Patzovitz and the mother-in-law of Reb Osher Arieli. And she's listening into their conversation, and Reb Shmulevitz quoted a Yerushalmi. So she turns to him and says, Rafal, are you already learning Yerushalmi? Have you finished Bavli? So he said, no, Tosfos quotes the Yerushalmi. So she says, you should say then, if you quote Yerushalmi, you should say Tosfos quotes Yerushalmi. You shouldn't just say Yerushalmi. And I just seeing these people, these are the real aristocracy, the nobility of Torah. These were blue-blooded individuals. They the Shmulevitz Yichus. I'm not going to go into it, but basically the whole of the Eastern European Yichus merges into their family. And these are people that have a regal connection to Torah and a warmth to Torah that's a different sort of different stature to what the rest of us have. And for me, that was very impactful.
Interesting. And am I understanding right that you've taken a sort of, amalgamated and merged these different influences? Some people are very, I guess, dogmatic. They have one Rebbe, they have one Mahalach, there's nothing else. Has your, I guess, journey, story, yeshiva experience, is it more of a merging of very different worlds into, I guess, a broader, more holistic Torah standpoint?
I don't know. I don't think I could claim that. In learning, I'm very much a brisker. I don't really understand other Darkei Halimud. I struggle to understand what anyone who comes from a different base of medrash is saying in Londus. So in that sense, I guess I'm quite narrow. I really only understand one way of learning. In Machshava, maybe in Machshava and philosophy I've done more of an amalgamation, maybe. But it's complicated. It needs a whole. It needs a lengthy discussion. Exactly where I see myself in the world of Machshava. It's been more just about what speaks to me and what I've been able to use for my own growth, rather than any sort of a systematic, dedicated desire to create a philosophy of my own or something like that.
I can see time is up. Thank you so much, Rabbi Zobin, for sharing, I guess, of your own story, of your own self, of your experiences, of beautiful anecdotes and stories from your Rabbi and your experiences. And I guess some of the conversation will be continued on Thursday nights and on other occasions. But I know we all value that sharing with us those Masoros week in, week out, as you do with us in evening base.
Yeah, I mean, if I hope tonight, if I can share a little bit of what these people meant to me, that would give me tremendous simcha. These were and are great people. someone like Rabbi Yitzchak, my Rabbi Rabbi Yitzchak Soloveitchik, just the simcha you saw with him on a Simchas Torah, and the Avedas one saw with him on a Tisha B'Av were remarkable. These are the people that lived with the Yiddishkeit in the fibre of their beings in a very special way, and halavai we could all have that. And if I can share a little bit of that, then I'd feel that would be a great privilege.
At least it's a Musa Haskell. I think many of us in Yeshiva and in other areas, we go to learn. We don't necessarily see Rebbeim and Rabbanim in other experiences. We don't spend Yom Kippur in Yeshiva. We don't spend Yom Tov or Tisha B'Av. So I guess maybe for us, it's a Musa Haskell to try to also get the vantage points on other, besides the shir, besides the daily shir, to try to see them in Avodas Hashem beyond the base of Medrash and develop those relationships.
It's worth it. I mean, I had the privilege of eating Yom Tov meals with my rabbis. My phenomenal wife let me, even after I was married, on rare occasions go to to eat with my rabbis. You learn so much just from seeing. You learn practical halacha from seeing Hilchos Netilas Yadayim and Hilchos B'tzias Hapas and how to do kiddush, through to a hashkafa on how to interact with family, and these are very special things.
Thank you so much for your time, for sharing with us.
My pleasure. I should say I still consider myself a Talmud. When I'm in Eretz Yisrael, I go back to see my Rabbi. It's interesting. When I go into see Rabbi Yitzchak, I normally pace several hours outside, round and round, doing chazar in the sukkah before I have the guts to go in. My son, I went with my son a while back, and my son said to me, Daddy, you're shaking. And I do shake when I go into him. These are different tier individuals, and it's important to recognize that there's a hierarchy in Klal Yisrael, and these are the great people.
Would you say, therefore, I guess you said that the relationship is not necessarily a casual, or I guess a lot of people are looking for a Rebbeim, and many of us nowadays with our Rebbeim, it's more pally, more friendly, more open. But the relationship you're talking about, much more distant and with a moira and a pachad.
I feel a moira and a pachad. Yeah, Chazal say, the Mishnah Nova says, that you have to be zohir with Tamil Chomim, gachalas and gachalas eish. And because these figures were great figures, I feel that, yeah. Because these are great figures, I feel that. And
educationally for people, in terms of fostering those relationships, so be looking for relationships, and when they're developing relationships with Rabbeim and Rabbanim, is it important? How important is it to keep the distance? How important is it to try to bridge that gap and to sort of feel very comfortable and very open with them?
It's two different things you're asking. I think one should be open with a Rabbi and try and gain what one can. But if one is lucky enough to have a Rabbi who's a proper Talmid Chacham, then one should recognise that that's a different tier. It is a problem here in England because there's a shortage of that. But when I'd say to everyone here listening, when you go to Eretz Yisrael, revisit your rabbis in Eretz Yisrael and try and get that. Try and dedicate time. Like when you go to Eretz Yisrael, if you're lucky enough, if you're still single and you've got the opportunity to do that, go for an Elzman and learn. If you're at a stage in your life where you can't do an Elzman, then when you go to Israel for a holiday for a couple of weeks, take 2 days off and go and learn in Yeshiva again and sit at the feet of your having missed other games, sit at their feet and learn Torah from them.
I think that's a worthy message and charge to all of us. I guess when the coronavirus ends, running back to Eretz Yisrael, wherever we learned, to try to reconnect to the Eish Das of the base of Medrash.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi Zobin.